the Last Judgment is not just something that happens at the end, but it is a perpetual reality. It is basically an image of how reality functions. And it's not arbitrary to think that that would be the case, because it is an image of the end. And you have to remember how the ancients thought of the end of something. It's not just the moment when the time runs out, but it is the moment that shows you the reason for everything that came before.
This is Jonathan Pageau. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
I'm very glad that you've all decided to join us for what I know is going to be a very special evening, and I want to make a few introductory remarks about our speaker, though I know he's already well known to many of you, Mr. Jonathan Pageau, who has emerged as a truly powerful and prophetic voice in the last years, speaking deeply to our culture's longing for meaning and coherence, both at the individual level and at the level of our shared corporate existence. He has been identified, I think, not playfully, alongside of Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, and Bishop Robert Barron as one of the four horsemen of meaning. And I know that many of you have benefited from his gifts as an interpreter. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of sitting next to Jonathan in a seminar on Exodus with Jordan Peterson and other friends, and that was an example for me of the kind of thing that Jonathan does so very well, this opening up of the texts and the images, of the symbols, of the structures of meaning and narrative of the past here in the present. A few months ago, our students had the pleasure of seeing Jonathan in Greece, where our program begins, and I had the great pleasure of going to Meteora, that are the oldest sites, monastic sites in the Orthodox world, where Jonathan gave a wonderful talk about how what monks do is they look up, and they show others the way of looking up. But Jonathan Pageau is, of course, not a monk, but I think it is true to say that his own life and witness has been dedicated to teaching others to look up. Though he's known broadly as a commentator, his métier, you might say, his vocation, is as a carver, as an artist, as a carver of icons in particular, and these are found in churches around the world. Jonathan has spoken about how the icon works by compression. That is to say, it draws together different times, elements, and ways of thinking and understanding into a fundamental relationship such that all these can shine forth in this compressed form. It kind of unfolds. I think something very similar to that is true of Jonathan's work as a commentator, that he draws diverse aspects of our world, our culture, our history, everything from comic books to movie scenes to postmodernism through to the images of the deep symbolic past into relationship with one another such that their meaning can shine forth for and in us. This evening, Jonathan will bring his considerable interpretive talents to bear upon the topic of the medieval cosmos. Yet, in speaking to us of the shape of the medieval world, he is not only speaking of the past. With his iconographic sensibility, he will help us to locate our present in this time and place. Boston College was founded, you might say, on a kind of double conviction if we're going to speak about directionality, both of the need to look up and in the conviction that in order to look forward, we need to look back. By allowing our present moment to be illuminated by the past, we are better able to understand who and what we are and what is the work we must undertake. I can think of no better guide for us on this particular journey than Mr. Pageau, and I hope you will join me in giving him a warm welcome now.
So first off, I obviously want to thank Stephen, thank Ralston. As someone who went to university in a very postmodern world, I studied fine art, and so that the way of thinking was very strong even in the 90s. This kind of very critical and cynical approach to art, to the stories, to the great stories that make us who we are. Encountering Ralston and the type of work they do, and also the level of students that we've met at Ralston has been inspiring for us and gives me personally hope for the future, but hope for my own children who are coming close to that age where they will also have to enter the world. And the type of vision that Ralston is able to give the students, this love of these ancient stories. But like Stephen said in his introduction, this is not about just analyzing the past in order to accumulate knowledge, but it really is finding the light in the past, but shining towards the future. And so what I want to talk about tonight is a specific image in the medieval world that is called the Last Judgment. It is one of the most complicated images in the canon of iconography. And I thought it would be interesting to look at that image, especially in the wake of the students having just read Dante's Commedia. And so, of course, Dante goes down into hell, ascends purgatory, ascends the heavens, all up into the prime mobile and into the presence of God. And, of course, Dante wasn't making up the things that he wrote. He was synthesizing, he was bringing together a cosmological vision that the ancients had, that the medievals had in common. That's why his poem was accepted so readily, because he was able to just pull these things in together so beautifully. And the icon of the Last Judgment does that also. That is, it is a kind of synthesis of Christian imagery, and it pulls everything together into one image. This particular version of the Last Judgment is in a church near Venice, on an island called Torcello. It is a 6th century church, but the mosaics were made in the 12th century, and so they have this kind of high medieval Byzantine Venice approach. Some of the images in Venice would have been in the same style as well. Some of the images that you find in Sicily also, for example, would be similar in style. And the thing about this image that I like particularly, this one version of the Last Judgment, is that it contains 3 images, let's say, stuck together. So in the middle tier, you'll see it on the left, there is the image of the Last Judgment itself. You can see it's the crucifixion. And then below the crucifixion is an image called the Anastasis, or the descent into Hades. And these 3 images are kind of stacked on top of each other. As we look at it, I think there's a very particular reason why this is the case. And those 3 together will help us understand what it is that this image of the Last Judgment, what can it tell us today, right? Is it just this very strange, weird images of people getting devoured by worms, and everybody loves to look at the devils, especially, all these kind of strange figures of angels and demons, and what is going on in this? Or does it have something to tell us? And I do believe that it does. I believe that the image of the Last Judgment is actually a way to understand how identity formation functions. And I believe that the image of the Last Judgment is actually a way to understand how identity formation functions.
We announced that our membership figure stood at 769, 800 and 700. Listen properly. 769,820 and 70 members, down from 100.2 million in 2012.
I believe that the image of the Last Judgment is actually a way to understand how identity formation functions. I would even go a little further, but looking at this image and kind of understanding this image can help us understand how thought functions. It is how it is that we come to bring things together and how it is that they break apart, right? This problem of attention, how it is that we're capable of having attention and how it is that our attention dissipates is contained in this structure. And all the weird things about it, once we understand that, we can see how the Last Judgment is not just something that happens at the end, but it is a perpetual reality. It is basically an image of how reality functions.
Listen properly.
How the Last Judgment is not just something that happens at the end, but it is a perpetual reality. It is basically an image of how reality functions.
We had 2 bags of grass, 75 pellets of mescaline.
And it's not arbitrary to think that that would be the case, because it is an image of the end. And you have to remember how the ancients thought of the end of something. It's not just the moment when the time runs out, but it is the moment that shows you the reason for everything that came before, right? We still use that way of speaking today, right? What is our end? That is, what is the purpose? What is the reason why we're doing things? And so the ancients would have understood the Last Judgment as being a culmination, right? As a kind of synthesis of all things towards their purpose. You could say towards their purpose, you could say towards their identity, towards what it is that they are, and how it is that we discern what things are. Sounds very abstract at the outset, but you'll see that once you get into it, it's not so difficult. Now, one of the things to understand is that in church architecture in the Middle Ages, the images were placed very deliberately.
Listen properly.
Images were placed very deliberately. Their images were placed very deliberately. It wasn't accidental, the reason why we put certain images in certain places. And in this case, it's quite simple. The church is a basilica, it's a long church, and in what we would call the east side of the church, that when you enter into a church, you look towards the end, you see what's called the apse, which is the place where the priest is, and it has a little half dome on top of it. And so in the apse is this image, which is an image of the Virgin with the child in her arms. And then on the western wall, which is the last part of the church, is the Last Judgment. So it's quite simple. There's nothing subtle about it. It's the beginning and the end. It's the child and the fulfillment. It's the rising and setting of the sun, right? There's this saying that the Son of Man will come like a lightning bolt from the east to the west. And that's why churches are directed eastwards, is that there is this movement. I mean, it's a cosmic movement. I mean, everything moves from east to west. The stars, the sun, the moon. There's this motion that the ancients understood as defining the beginning and the end. And so the way the church is structured is that you have this image of the beginning, and that's the image from which revelation comes, right? The priest is there, the Eucharist is being celebrated there. That's the source of identity. And especially in this particular church, which is a cathedral means that it's the seat of the bishop. It's the most important church in an area that is recognized as the cathedra, which is the throne of the bishop. The throne of the bishop is underneath, below here, and is down at the bottom there. And that is the source of authority, and it moves west towards the end. So the whole church is structured in that way, which brings you up and down the register. Now, what's interesting about this image is that now the end is represented in 3 ways. Represented as the end of Christ, that is the end in the sense of the crucifixion.
I have something to show you. Something that will help you solve your mystery and rescue the others. I can only be honest with you if you are honest with them.
Presented as the end in a different way, which is what we call the harrowing of Hades, where Christ goes down into death and saves the people that are caught there. And it's, of course, represented as the Last Judgment itself, which is now the finality of all things. And this is also a way to help understand how the medieval cosmos, or how medieval people thought about the world. They all fit into each other. That is, what's happening in one image is repeated in the other. And what's happening in one image is contained in the other image.
In the future,
It's like a little fractal bundle. What's happening in one image is contained in the other image. It's like a little fractal bundle where things are just inserted into each other so that you get this unfurling of reality in this way. A little example to start with, you'll start to get used to it as we move into the image, is that the crucifixion is, of course, Christ dying on the cross, his mother on his right side, St. John the Evangelist on his left side, and then underneath him, there's this weird little image. If you look at underneath his feet, so that's a skull, and it's the skull of Adam. So you can see the blood of Jesus is coming down his feet, and coming down his body, and is dripping down onto the skull of Adam. So there's a whole legendary mechanism to understand why the skull of Adam was there and everything. That's not that important. What's mostly important is to understand the relationship that is happening there, which is that Christ on the cross is redeeming Adam. He is the new Adam. When we see the blood and water coming from his side, it's often described as the new creation, as the birth of the church, as Eve taken from the side of Adam, all of these analogies which are found in the liturgical text. But what's going on down here, right, that is what this image is about. So the descent into Hades is the secret of what's happening on the cross. That's the way to understand it. So we have the cross, you have the crucifixion, and then what's secretly happening on the cross is represented in this image, which is Christ coming down into death. And now the cross doesn't hold him. He holds the cross as a standard, you know, almost like as a weapon, as this thing that he's conquered, actually. And he is going down into death, and he is grabbing Adam and Eve. That's who he's going to get. So the two old people that you see are Adam and Eve, and then there are different people represented in different ways. The kings, King David and King Solomon, and then St. John the Baptist, who is pointing to him, and who it was just there before. And then what you see are the dead, right? All these dead people in their tombs that are rising up, that they're coming into this moment where Christ is bringing everybody out of death. But that, like I said, is basically contained in this little image. So the anastasis is contained in the crucifixion, okay? We'll get back to these images later, but I just want you to start to think the way that the medievals thought. And in a very similar manner, the whole Last Judgment is contained in the other images as well. The Last Judgment is a very complicated image. But let me point you to a few things right at the outset, just for you to understand how all of this comes together, is that right here, for you to understand how all of this comes together, is that right here,
Listen properly.
and Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve are now in the Last Judgment. The skull of Adam is at the crucifixion. Adam and Eve are being taken out of death, and now they're being brought to the final end, the end of all things, where everything is being revealed and the judgment is happening. All through these images, you have this same pattern where things enter into each other, where things kind of fit into each other, and there's this reflection in different ways of the images above and below. And so as we move forward, I'm gonna show you a few of these. But the first thing to understand is, what is the Last Judgment? What is going on in this image? And so this is the first image that we know of the Last Judgment. This is a 6th century image from Ravenna. And so now we have Christ in the center, and he has his hand out. He is pointing to the sheep, and on his left hand you have the goats. And so that is where the whole idea of the Last Judgment comes from. Is Christ saying, on that day, on that final day, I will say to the sheep, come, enter into my kingdom, and I will say to the goats, leave away, far away from me. And so that's the way to understand the basic idea of what the Last Judgment is. There are some things which are brought inside the sheep, and there are some things that are excluded, which are the goats. So on the right hand of Christ, on his right hand, you have the sheep, and on his left hand, that's what it said in the text. It says, you'll say to the sheep on his right, enter, the goats on his left, go away. Obviously, it's not the kind of thinking that we like to have today. But what I'd like to propose to you is that that is actually how all identity formation works. It is anything that exists is necessarily a judge. Anything that has identity. Anything, I mean anything, like a cup, a pencil, a baseball club, like anything that has identity is necessarily a judge. Because it is a specific identity, it necessarily has two things. It has an inside and it has an outside. It has things that belong to it and it has things that don't belong to it. And there's sometimes there's a hierarchy of that type of participation. It's often not necessarily a clear demarcation, but there is a type of hierarchy of participation in something, and then there is an outside. And so all things that have identity necessarily function as judges. So all things that have identity necessarily function as judges. So all things that have identity necessarily function as judges. And that's why in the ancient world, for example, a saint that I love very much, St. Maximus the Confessor, he talks about the divine logos, like in the gospel, but he says all things have a logos. And all things that exist have a name, a reason, a purpose. And actually, all of those are the same. The name of something, the reason, the purpose for it. It's the reason why you see it in the first place. He talks about the divine logos, like in the gospel, but he says all things have a logos, right? All things that exist have a name, a reason, a purpose, and actually all of those are the same. Right? The name of something, the reason, the purpose for it, it's the reason why you see it in the first place. Why do I identify something as having identity, as having being? Because I can see its purpose, even if it's unconscious. It doesn't have to be conscious. Right? It's like if I know that if I have a name for something, it's because there's a reason why there's a name for it. I know what a bottle is because I drink water out of it, and it's a judge because, and I participate in that judgment because I don't want to get wet. And so if there's a hole in the bottle, it's a bad water bottle, and I will exclude it from its participation in the identity of bottle, right?
About why they're here and who they are. There is absolutely an infinite amount of different species in the universe. As far as good versus bad extraterrestrials or even species, think about each extraterrestrial species as being very similar to human.
You just can't avoid it. This is just how reality functions, whether it's your family, whether it's school, all of these things all have this structure. And the Last Judgment, the way to understand it is it's the most extreme version of that. It's the one that takes it to the very limit of what you can almost tolerate in terms of understanding what identity formation is. Think of it like it's a cosmic version of every time I recognize something as having identity. It's this massive, massive version of it. So what do we have in the image? We have Christ in glory at the center of the image. This is the Son of Man, right? This is the prophetic image of the perfect man. So if you're not a Christian, in some ways it doesn't totally matter for this conversation. Just think of it like it's the ideal person, right? As Christians, we believe that that's this person, but just as a structure, think of it like it's the ideal of a person. It's the human, the highest human that you can imagine.
A lot of you have already been exposed to the main species that is here on our planet at this time. The species that I'm talking about are the grays. So there are different levels of gray.
The one that contains all that which is human in it, and that is basically the source of why we know that there's humanity. It's the culmination of all that is good about what human is, okay? And that's here. And that's the judge. Why is it the judge? Because that is it, right? That's how we understand the good. It's like if we know what a good person is, then we inevitably know what aligns with it, what comes towards it, and what is moving away from it. You can think about it in a sports team is always the easiest one because it's amoral, so it doesn't rub people wrong. You know what a good player, a good basketball player is, and that good basketball player becomes a standard by which we measure other basketball players. It just happens that if you have one that rises up really high, then that standard gets higher, and all of a sudden the judgment becomes stronger, right? If I go to a basketball game for kids that are 13, 14, or if I go to a professional basketball game, I do not judge the same way because the standard of the participation is not the same. I go to professional games, the standards have been lifted so high that I'm like, well, that's not Michael Jordan. There's always this judgment. And this is something that happens inevitably. So imagine, this is the perfect man who is there, and now he is signifying that he is judging the world. He is showing the right hand and the left hand. And he is saying to those on the right, come in, and to those on the left, move away. Those that don't fit with the ideal or aren't moving towards the ideal are pushed out, and those that fit with the ideal or are moving towards the ideal are gathered in. So the structure of the image, this image of the heavenly man, and that's how to understand it, right? It's like, why is it a heavenly man? It's because he's the ideal. He's just higher than us. And it's a metaphor, but it's not. And that's how we think of things that are above us, that are more than us, that are higher than us. So they appear in heaven. They come down from above. And that's how we recognize that they are the model by which we measure other things. And it's a very practical thing. There's nothing, it's not magical in any way. If I am here and I'm in front of you and I'm above you right now, then I am the one who gives the standard of what is happening now. Right? I am the measure of this event at this moment. This is how it works. If you have someone who rises above, even physically above everybody else, then everybody can see him, but not all of you can see each other. And so I can judge all of you, right? But you can't all judge each other. You can judge me in this case, though. It's a little different. But just to understand that this idea of the heavenly man, right? And so the image is very ancient from the very beginning of Christianity. We have these images that represent this relationship between heaven and earth. And they're not actually stories. Like this image, you see Christ above as the heavenly man, as the Son of Man. And then you have the church, which is below. and you have two apostles. You have St. Peter and St. Paul that are like two pillars of the church. That, again, is a very simple structure of reality. What is church? If you know what church means, it means not the word church, but what it translates. It means ecclesia, it means the gathering. Okay? And that's how it works. That's how a body works. And a body is a gathering of identities that fit with a higher identity. It's a gathering of things that are brought together into a higher participation. That's what a body is. Anybody, like anybody that you can imagine.
Listen properly.
Right, a body is a gathering of identities that fit with a higher identity. It's a gathering of things that are brought together into a higher participation. That's what a body is. Anybody, like anybody that you can imagine, whether it's a body of literary work or whether it's a higher or whatever, anything you can imagine as having an identity, that's how it works. So it gathers the things together into its head, and then it has to align with what the head is offering for it to be part of that body. So anything you can imagine always functions that way. So that's why we talk about the church as being a body, as being a gathering, things together that are then seen in light of the reason why they exist. And of course, now we're talking about a giant cosmic image, but that's just how things work. That's how all things work. It's a fractal idea. It's like once you kind of see the final judgment, the end of all things in this image of the last judgment, right? You get a glimpse of how it reflects in little ways in everything that we do, okay? And so there are different ways of representing it. This is one way, and the ascension is also another image that has the same structure as the last judgment, in part because in Scripture, when Christ goes up, the angel says, the way that he went up, he's going to return. But if you understand it, that this is what this basic image, it's a head, something above, an image reference, and then a gathering below of people that are looking up and that are pointing at it. They're saying, oh, it's that. That's the thing that makes us together, right? That's the person, that's the principle, that's the top that makes us understand that we are together.
We are here at the MNU head office, Department of Alien Affairs. My name is Vikas van der Merwe, and we try to engage with the porn on behalf of MNU and on behalf of humans.
And then the Virgin becomes an image of that body herself, because she is that for Christ. She's the one who gathered his body in her womb. It's pretty simple. She gathered the body in her womb. She becomes an image for the body itself. There are different ways you can represent it. This is ascension. Sometimes it's just an ontological relationship. It's actually not seen at all. It's not representing anything. It's just a relationship between Christ above, the Virgin below, and the disciples gathered together in the body. And it's analogous to the person with the head and the body. The head is the place where meaning comes from. The head is the place that we recognize somebody by. I don't really recognize somebody by their shoulder. I tend to recognize them by their eyes, by their expression. So the head is the place of meaning. It's the place of purpose. It's the place where we recognize identity. So it's normal to use that type of imagery together. Now, the one thing I want to say, and it's important to say this because it's already kind of frightening to talk about the last judgment this way, is that there is a way to understand the idea of the right hand and the left hand of Christ as not just being good, bad. That's how we tend to think about it. It's like, that which comes towards the inside is good, that which moves towards the outside is bad. But in the very structure of this image, you'll see that is not the case. Right? That moving out from the identity is not always bad. Because obviously, we're not don't believe in the monad, like we believe that multiplicity is necessary and that is good. And so there's a sense in which that which appears on the left hand of Christ will often represent change, will represent, let's say, a kind of wildness to it, or a kind of or difference. And that which is on his right hand will represent unity, will represent identity, because it's that which comes towards identity, right? So it's all not always negative, not always positive. A good example is, in this case here, this is an image, it's a deisis, which is again the Son of Man in the middle and two people on the side. And now on his right hand, he has the Virgin. And on his left side, he has John the Baptist. Now comparing those two is useful to understand the difference between the right hand and the left hand. One is secret, one is covered, one is quiet, and it's kind of like this inner reality, this mystery of the inside. And then the other one, he's out in the desert, he's wearing animal skins, he's got crazy hair, and he's screaming to everybody to repent. So that's a good, like a basic way to think of it. If you look a little bit again to the right, you'll see St. Peter, who's here, and then you'll see St. Paul, who is a little bit further down. They are, again, the same that are here, the two pillars of the church, St. Peter and St. Paul. They are again here, which is you have St. Peter and St. Paul. This is the most interesting because St. Paul was not at the Ascension. So why is he there? Why is he in the image of the Ascension? And it's because it's representing a structure of reality. It's not just saying, this is not just an event. This is like a pattern. But this is like it's a way for you to see reality through these images rather than just kind of didactic thing. So who's St. Peter, right? St. Peter, he's the rock, he's the foundation, he's the apostle to the inside, right? He's the apostle to the Jews in that case. And who's St. Paul, right? St. Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles. Not just that, he's also like the 13th apostle, semi-legitimate. I'm a Christian, you know, it's like he kind of self-justifies his existence as an apostle. Like, he's interesting. If you look at him, thinking about him as the left hand, you could say, Christ. He talks about himself, he says that he is a shapeshifter. He says that I'm all things to all men. He actually said, I do not have a specific identity, right? I am, in some ways, shifty in my existence. He calls himself the abortive apostle. He uses all these really strong terms. I'm the fool for Christ, okay? So he is the opposite of reason. He's the opposite of, he has that. And in this case, it's not bad at all. It's actually wonderful. It's actually great. It actually is the fullness of being to understand that this movement towards the inside and this movement towards the outside is this breathing in and breathing out of being that is just a normal part of how existence functions, okay? And I think that's important to say because we always sometimes get caught up in the moral question, thinking that just good, bad, but clearly in this image of the Last Judgment, that is not the case. And the importance of having St. Peter and St. Paul, like I said, not just in the Last Judgment, but in all these other Christian images, is there to help us see this relationship, right? If you think about the two apostles, you'll start to see interesting images of what it is that they represent. So, what is St. Peter's sin? It's pride, right? What is pride? Pride is excess of identity. That's what pride is. So you can see, like, and what is St. Paul's sin? Right? It's the thorn in the flesh. Okay? And so you can see in their character how they, both in their good side and their bad side, they really represent two aspects of reality. This idea of gathering in the multiplicity, gathering in the identity for its purpose, but also loosening the identity, kind of letting things have their own particular existence. Right? And that's necessary. Everything you do is necessary. In any team, any family, you have to find that balance between breathing in and breathing out, right? You can't always be moving towards unity, or else you cripple, or else you become fragile. And you can't obviously always be moving towards multiplicity, because at some point, your identity stops to exist. And that's called decomposition. And when things decompose, then they cease to be the thing that they were. The idea of the Last Judgment is that it is this moment where the ideal man is judging all of humankind, is judging all of what it is that is good and bad about humanity, and is showing the consequences of what that does, of what that is. And he's calling everybody towards the resurrection. You can understand the resurrection, again, as this finality, as this is all that you are. You're a person. The resurrection is everything that you are, is now gathered into something. It's gathered into the end. It's gathered into the finality. And that includes body, it includes your soul, it includes all the aspects of you, but now all of them kind of in this moment that is not chronological anymore, that is like the end of time, and that's the end of all things, and so it shows what things are. And so what we see in the image is you're seeing the angels calling all the dead out of their abodes. And so the animals are regurgitating the people, regurgitating their prey, and on the other side, then you have again the monsters, the sea monsters, regurgitating their prey as the angels are calling, right? They're calling us all to be gathered back into unity. And so this is, of course, an image of the movement of multiplicity into unity, right? It is the movement of that which is fragmented, that which is broken, that which has been eaten by animals. For those that have read Dante will know that the animals represent that which is not human. Sometimes it can represent aspects of humanity. It can represent passions often. It represents an excess of an aspect of us. And so those excesses, you could say, or those broken aspects of humanity are being given up, right? And they're being gathered back together to form a single body, right? To form a body again. And that is represented in another way, next to the angels calling the dead out of the earth, as the angel that is scrolling all the stars back together. Right? He's scrolling the heavens. You can see he's got the scroll of the stars, and he is basically wrapping them back together into a single roll. He's gathering a multiplicity back into one. They're just different ways of representing it. Represented as the bodies, represented as the stars, but it's gathering of all things back into their center, okay, back into the one. This is a very interesting image. So this image is, so you can see, I'll show you where it is in the image. It's down here, okay? Here. This is called the Hechimasia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm with a bunch of Greek speakers. Makes me feel a little embarrassed, but humans. And what the Hechimasia is, it's the prepared throne. It's a very interesting idea. It's the idea that the throne is prepared for the return of the heavenly man. So the ideal is coming, right? The reason for things is coming. But in order for it to connect, you have to get things ready. You have to prepare the throne for the arrival of the king. And now you see, again, Adam and Eve being brought to the foot of the throne because, in many ways, they are the throne, right? They are the body that is gathered. They're an image. You take the first man and the first woman. It's a good way to get everybody in an image without having to make billions of people. It's a good way to do it. Take the first one, put them there and say, all of humanity is gathered together as the throne. You could imagine it as a throne. You can imagine it as a city. Imagine it as a bride. That's often how it's represented in Scripture, and this union of heaven and earth, and of the head and the body, and of the heaven and earth are represented as a sexual union. All of these different images are appropriate to understand the idea of gathering things together, so that that which is above can come and encounter it. Right? It reproduces the text in Genesis 2. Where God gathers the dust together and he blows air into it. He takes heaven, puts it inside, like gathers a bunch of stuff and then puts heaven inside. And that's how things exist. That's how everything exists.
Engage.
Everything exists as a gathering of body that has purpose inside it. You need a reason, or else you cannot recognize things as having identity. They have to have something that brings multiplicity into one. Now, one of the aspects of the Last Judgment, and you see it, of course, here quite a bit, is so now you have the devils that are here, then you have the devils that are here, and you have the angel that is here, and what are they doing? They're weighing the soul. Right? And so they're actually deciding, right? They're basically judging, they're participating in the judgment. They're judging which side you're gonna go. Are you gonna go on the side of the right hand, which is the one that gathers, or are you gonna go on the side of the left hand, which is the dispersal and the breakdown and decomposition? And so this idea, right, it's one which is so universal. It's everywhere in culture. And so it's just this. It's exactly this. And everybody experiences this all the time, right? It's like there is something in you, the wild part, a part that is gonna break everything, or however else you want to think of it, but there's a part in you that is pulling you towards dissolution. And there's an aspect of you that is pulling you towards one, that's putting you towards unity, towards good things. St. Gregory of Nyssa, for example, he's an early church father, 4th century, he said, at birth, all men are given an angel and a demon. And this is not just Homer Simpson, this is very old. Like, all men are given an angel and a demon, and that's what we now come to call a guardian angel. But, we've forgotten about the guardian demon. We don't like that one.
Not everyone's surprised.
But basically, think about it as the aspect of you which is pulling you up, the best aspect of you, because you can see it, right? Everybody can see it inside them. It's like St. Paul would say, Christ in me.
Listen properly.
Like, what is Christ in me? It is the aspect of me that I can recognize as moving towards that which I know to be good, and that I know to be the truth and that which gives life. But then there's also, of course, the flesh. That's the way St. Paul talks about it, right? That I do the things that I do not want to do, that the flesh pulls me away from that. So you can understand it as above and below is a good way to understand it, right? Because it's a very simple way to represent it, because above are the patterns and the lights, and you don't hurt yourself much with what is above, although, yeah, it's true that there are storms. But let's say higher up from that, you have the stars, you have the patterns of reality, you have the light which comes up and shines, makes everything visible, and then below you've got things that die in darkness and decompose. And so the idea that hell is below is a very, very intuitive reality. Like, it's very simple. You don't have to actually work too hard to understand that things decompose down here. Right? And the specific and the particular is down here, and the universal and the one is up here. And you can do it if you want. Like, go into a field and put your face on the ground, and you'll see that you see very few things. Right? You'll just see a bunch of grass and maybe a few bugs. But if you go up a mountain, then all of a sudden all that multiplicity gets gathered and gathered into one, until you can see the pattern, you can kind of see the layout. So this idea that heaven is above and that hell is below is very reasonable. Everybody should believe that. It's not a... Okay, so below down here now you have the two sides, which is you have the gathering here, and then you have the dispersal here. And the gathering is represented as paradise. Now, paradise is not heaven. It's really important to understand the difference. Paradise is not up there. Paradise is the gathering down here, right? It's the garden. Paradise is Eden. It's the good which is manifested and gathered in the world. So what you have is, you have the image of the cherub that is on the door of the garden, and it's usually, I don't know if you can see it here, it's holding a lamp. Often it's holding a sword, like a flaming sword. We see St. Peter, who's opening the door, right, to paradise. And then in paradise, there are three people. Abraham, the Virgin, and who can you guess who the third one is? This guy. So I'll tell you, it's a good thief, okay? But Abraham and the Virgin, it's really important to understand, they're not metaphors for paradise. They are paradise.
Hey, oh, I love you guys.
I love you so much.
It's really important to understand, they're not metaphors for paradise. They are paradise. When Christ talks about the vision of Lazarus and the rich man, he says, Lazarus is gathered into the bosom of Abraham. That is what paradise is. It is to be gathered in the things from which your multiplicity originates. To be gathered to your fathers is to return back to the place where you were one with that which is around you. That's what the Garden of Eden is, the top of the mountain. It's a place where all multiplicity comes together into one. And Abraham, for the Jews, is paradise. Because he is the source of unity for their nation. He is the place where they recognize each other as being one, okay? That's important to understand. And the Virgin is, of course, the same for us. She is that which gathered the body together. She represents the gathering of the body. She represents the throne. She represents the land. She is the mountain. She has all that type of imagery around her because she gathered the Logos into her womb. The thief is there to remind you what I told you at the beginning, which is that all of these images go together. Because what's happening in this image is already happening in this image. It's all already in that image. Because we forget, there's one cross. There are three crosses, right? There's Christ in the center, and there's one who recognizes him as the source of value, as the source of virtue, as the source of innocence, and there's one who does not recognize him and mocks him and derides him. And so the last judgment is already happening on the cross. It's already there. It's all encapsulated into that one image. Not just that, but this also. What is Christ doing? Why are these characters there? He's saying, this is your mother, this is your son. He's saying, this is how you're together. This is why, this is your relationship. This is what makes you not two, but one. Is I am giving you an identity right now. So Christ on the cross does everything that the image of the Last Judgment does already. That's why this image is so astounding, right? This image, it's like all of this is gathered together into that one image at the top. And it's just this unfurling of the consequences of one action. Now, why does it matter? Why? You know, it's like, okay, so I can understand this, right? I understand the idea of the ideal man. I understand the idea of the top of the pyramid, you know, the head honcho, the president, the top guy, the captain of the team. I get that. That's easy to understand. We all know we look up to these characters that are heroic, that kind of have that brightness to them, and they kind of gather us into their leadership, right? So why this? Why this? And that is the mystery of identity, is captured in that image. And that's what all of you that have read Dante have discovered, is that
Listen properly.
identity doesn't just hold together. That's pride. That's no good. Identity is always self-giving. Identity doesn't just hold together. That's pride. That's no good. Identity is always self-giving. Identity doesn't just hold together. That's pride. That's no good. Identity is always self-giving. It always empties itself, necessarily. And there's nothing magical about it, right? It's almost a technical description of how things work. So for my steering wheel to have its identity, it has to offer itself to the car. It has to, or else who cares about a steering wheel? If I just have a fetishized steering wheel, like hung on my wall, it's irrelevant. All things give themselves to their higher participation. The world is made of sacrifice. All things give themselves to their higher participation. The world is made of sacrifice. All things give themselves to their higher participation. The world is made of sacrifice. So fascinating about understanding. And this is also why, you hear all this talk about Christian nationalism, like you probably heard all this kind of rumble about it, but there's something about Christian identity which is very particular, which is understanding that identity always gives itself. And it gives itself in two directions. It gives itself up necessarily. Like I said, the steering wheel has to give itself to the car has to give itself to fact of driving, and the fact of driving has to give itself to the existence of towns and of people living together. And all of these things have to stack up, all these goods, to give themselves up always. And that's what you see in Dante, is that ultimately that leads to something that is beyond the world. But identity also has to give itself down, right? It has to have compassion. The best way to understand it is that for there to not just be one car, there has to be flexibility in how car exists. It has to give itself to some extent. It has to loosen itself so that you can recognize multiplicity as well. So identity always gives itself up, but also always gives itself down. And that's what is amazing about this particular image of the Last Judgment. It's the only one that I know that has this structure where they take these three images and stack them together in a way that you see how they kind of fit into each other. But that is what is so, to me, astounding about this particular structure. So we'll save the worst part for the last, so we have to talk about hell, obviously, a little bit. The way to understand the bottom of the left-hand register, the way to understand hell is exactly the problem of fragmentation. And in some ways, the problem of identities and love and desire that are out of control. And what they do is they're not sufficient, right? And so sin, that's what sin is. It's like the thing that you aim towards, if it's the wrong thing, it's not sufficient. If it doesn't give itself up towards other identities, then it becomes insufficient. It eats you, devours you, it burns you, right? It destroys you. This is not something that happens at the end of the world. It's something that you can experience every single day. It eats you, devours you, it burns you, right? It destroys you. This is not something that happens at the end of the world. It's something that you can experience every single day, right? It's like if you give yourself to something so exclusively, or if you let something take over your life so exclusively, and you don't let it open up and participate in the other goods that are available to you, then it will eat you, right? It'll be like worms that are constantly eating your body. It'll be like fire that is burning, or it'll be like the cold that freezes you and makes you impossible for you to go forward. Right? We know that it's easier to see that with people that are addicted. When you know people that are addicted to something, you see it clearly, right? It's like this thing, this drug, this alcohol, this whatever has now taken over your life and is destroying you, but you persist in it and is basically devouring you. But the truth is that can be true of anything. It's not just, it can be true about work, right? It can be true about the love of a person, right? You can idolize someone and love them so much that it will destroy you. We've met people, everybody's met someone that have let that happen to them. So it's actually like a coherent description of how reality works, which is that if you are captured by things and you don't participate in these higher goods that lead up to the heavenly man, then you will burn, right? It will happen inevitably. But the one thing that I want to show you that's actually I like about this particular image of hell is that all the people of hell are all the elites. It's like monks and emperors and bishops, regular people don't go to hell, just important people. I kind of like that. And this can be represented as an upside down gathering, right? As a fetishized gathering, like a parody of the right hand, you could say. And so this is the Antichrist, who is on the lap of the devil as if he was Christ. He looks like Jesus, actually. He's made to look exactly like the way that you would represent the child Christ in the hands of the mother. This is exactly what I tried to tell you. It's like, if you are captured by something that completely takes you, it's almost like an inverse, it's a parody of the right hand. It's like this concentration of identity in the wrong place that then devours you. But what's beautiful about this is that you have these three. So if you look at, you have the Antichrist on the devil's lap, and on the other side you have probably Lazarus. It's not 100% clear who it is, but it's probably Lazarus. It is a soul that is saved and is in the bosom of Abraham. So think about it like, I'll show you the full image again. Okay, so it's actually quite beautiful because down here, right, you have Lazarus that is contained in the Abraham. Here you have the Antichrist that is on the devil. And think of it that across from that, if you were here and you turned around, then you would see Christ on the Virgin's lap. So this is what you would see. So you have this beautiful kind of structured meaning where all of the things kind of come together in the beginning and the end. And so, that is what I wanted to kind of help you see, is to maybe look at these types of images again with fresh eyes, understand that the medieval, how they understood reality, and the way that these images function as a kind of map of reality, the same way the gospel stories, the Bible stories, or the ancient myths function. And if we see them that way, we can get quite a bit of insight into how the world works. So thank you for your attention.
Stack up from the many to the one. How do we find our way from division back to unity?
Start with yourself. That's probably the best thing to do. And Jordan Peterson talks about cleaning your room. It's actually a great simple thing. It's to say that it can scale from the ground up, and that a person that is transformed and that has, that is moving, in truth towards virtue and beauty, will have reverberations around them, and then the world can start to clump again, And I think, like, for example, what Ralston's doing is a great example, because they're saying, we're not here to, this is not about policy. What we're going to do is we're going to create a paradise. What we're going to do is we're going to create a paradise.
We announced that our membership figures stood at 700, listen properly, 769,820 and 70 members, down from 100.2 million in 2012.
What we're going to do is we're going to create a paradise.
What's the matter with them? Ow! Woo! I feel really, really weird. Hey! Oh, I love you guys.
I love you so much.
What we're going to do is we're going to create a paradise. Than if we just change the law. Because when you change the law, you don't change anybody's heart. Right? If people think that this whatever culture war thing is going to be won by putting the right number of people on the Supreme Court from whatever side you are, that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, you'll just increase polarity and division and fight. But transform people. What we're going to do is we're going to create a paradise. What we're going to do is we're going to create a paradise. That's real. And that is undeniable. When you meet someone that is transformed. Stephen and I had the chance to go to Mount Athos together, and we were able to meet the abbot of one of the monasteries. And the man was just, I don't know what to say. I mean, he was glowing. He was not physically glowing, but he was clearly a transformed person. And it hushed everybody. You know, it's like everybody was reduced to silence. And I think that, you know, we don't often meet people like that, but we meet little versions of it, where we encounter people that have that light and that spark and are glowing. And we have to, that's the way transformation happens, I believe it.
Some of what you said reminded me of Plato, both in terms of, especially in his metaphysics, but to a lesser extent, the politics that he describes in the Republic.
fun. Let's let these animals do their show.
Is that just a coincidence, or is there any kind of direct influence there?